To order the Idaho County Board of Commissioners informal work session for January 23rd at 1:30. And we'll start with our treasurer's update. And Mike Green, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and I'll make it really quick. Basically, things are going well in the market. One of the things that's really interesting and kind of just latest news, as of 2 days ago, LGIP is now at 1.85. So it's making it very hard for me to want to invest money. Nevertheless, I am. So it's continuing to go up dramatically, which is good for the county and all the other municipalities, because it's 3 times what it was 3 years ago. So anyway, overall, the portfolio, our year to yield to maturity is up about 5 basis points to 2.04, and yield to worst is 1.98. We're staying within all our parameters because the portfolio is maturing and because investments long-term, about 5 years, is not terribly attractive. You really have to look that there are weighted average maturity is actually shrinking as well. So everything looks good. The bond market is stable. It's actually going up. Probably what I told you last quarter, it looked really good between 2.5 and 5 years. 2 days ago, I bought a 1.5-year bond for a little over 2%. So the bonds are getting, and especially in the near term, the rates are going up. So that seems to be the place to kind of focus attention. I've been more selective. The last time we met, you increased the amount. I have not spent it yet or invested it, but I am going slowly. At the investment committee, what we decided is, once again, we're into beginning the budget process. Although everything looks good, I haven't gone aggressively. There's not that big of a differential between LGIP and what I can do. So I don't see any reason to try to expand our investment portfolio at this time that we want to already approved. We can revisit this at the next meeting next quarter. That's kind of the overall consensus of the committee. Old business, core rate of inflation, that came up last time. One of our investment committee members asked us to track it against investments. I kind of looked at it a little askance, and now I think it's not a bad idea just to look at it as a barometer of saying this may be the bellwether we want to use as far as what rate we try to purchase bonds at. The rate of inflation's gone up 0.3 of a point since the last time we met. It was 1 point now, and it's currently 2.2. HHS cash balance, which is something that we're managing on a quarterly basis. It continues to remain stable. So we're not seeing any major fluctuations in that, so that's kind of what we're reporting on.
Well, one of the things we talked about was actually having Silas come and give the rationale for that budget remaining so high over the years. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, because remaining stable and gaining 1.6 million that's nice stability.
It is.
You said you bought a 1.5-year bond at 2%?
Yes, sir.
And LTIP is at 1.85?
Well, I bought the bond, and the next an hour later, I got an announcement from Oregon State Treasury. So I was feeling really good at the 2.08 or something like that. But yeah, it just skyrocketed. They announced it was 1.62 in the middle of January. It went up to 1.70, and they just announced it 2 days ago that it's now 1.85 going forward.
I remember when we were feeling good when our yield to maturity was 1.85.
Yes. So it's really strange.
Yeah.
U.S. Bank, the credit balance, we've been monitoring that. One of the things that as the recommendation of the investment committee is that we try to lower the monthly balance, that we're maintaining the average monthly balance because it's actually costing the county money. Because it's only paying 45 basis points, and as LGIP particularly continues to increase to 1.75 now, for every $1 million that we just let float in there, that's roughly $13,500 that we're losing out on our interest. And the worst case with U.S. Bank is we don't even get a credit to flow over the next year, it gets zero balanced out. So at the end of this year, our credit balance was in excess of $3,000 that got wiped out. So Becky's been moving it down to $2.5 million. I'm monitoring the payouts weekly, and I would like to see us slowly see if we can reduce that further down, because there's I don't see any reason why we can't. But that's of concern, but not major, but it's significant enough for us to do. There was a couple of points raised by the investment committee. One was the overall balance of the portfolio. There was concern that there was, given the banking industry, that we were fairly large into the banking industry. The other was we were fairly large in unis within California. In the case of the banks, and right now it represents about of the 22 million that we have invested, it represents about 4.5 million. It's spread across Canada, the U.S. and Australia. It's stable. They pay their interest. They're all AA rated or better. And they pay basically in today's market about 15 to 20 basis points better than something like. So I'm looking at that, taking that as a caution. And if anything is close, and there's an outfit, we'll stay away from banks just to kind of not have a too heavy leverage there. In the case of the bonds, the muni bonds, unfortunately, California is the only one that has anything worthwhile. Either on Oregon or Washington, they're almost impossible to find. So my first look when I'm looking at munis is to go to California, or excuse me, go to Oregon, go to Washington, and then default to California. But California is still, again, about 15 to 20 basis points better than anything in the other two states. And that's where we're restricted to buy. We cannot buy outside of those three states.
Right.
So, otherwise things are smooth, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike.
Happy
Good
convalescing. Thank you.
It's a lot more fun than it was 2008.
You're good,
All
shoulder.
right, let's move on to item 2, and that is for our update with the ordinance on Water Street. Mike Caparottis is here to give us a discussion on customer performance measure survey. Hey, Mike, thank you. Come on up.
This is on fourth classification, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So with me is Walt Shields, Chair of the fourth classification committee. Eric Perkins, our protection supervisor in Forest Grove. Jeff Classen, protection supervisor in West Oregon District, and Mike Tilley, my counterpart from West Oregon District, District Forester.
Welcome, thank you.
How should we?
Do you want to?
Format here.
Would you want to start with, because we've got, do you want to?
Can I stand back here with you?
Yes,
folks on
sure.
the side?
That'd be great. Thank you. Whatever works.
All right.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So we appreciate your time today and wanted to come and give you an update because we're at the very end of this process. And so, after we go through the next couple of weeks, we're going to finalize the process. You may get calls and questions from people in the county, and we would like you to know kind of where we're at and have information to give them good information and to direct them to us if you need to answer their questions. So that's why I really wanted to have some time with you. In front of you have a handout, which is, well, it's 4 pages, and I was bemoaning that it wasn't 1 page, but it does sort of give you an overview of the whole project. If someone asks you questions, I think you can find the answers very likely in that handout. So that's what you've got in front of you. And what I'm going to do here, I think, is just catch you up on the last couple of months since the last time we talked. So last time we talked, we were here, we had finished a draft classification. So we were trying to understand who in the county should be paying for wildland fire suppression from Northern Harvest Forestry and who shouldn't be. We convened the committee years ago, Walt's the chair of the committee. We, over the course of 11 meetings, and almost all of those 11 included field tours, did a draft classification, and we were going out to the public to say, here's what the classification looks like. We did a lot of public outreach through that. I appreciated some of you came to some of those meetings. I appreciated Nicole. We met with Nicole, and she news register and did some outreach for us. And your sheet talks about some of the other outreach projects we did, including in that was sending a letter to everybody who would potentially be changed. So we sent them we talked about the letter, not a postcard, but a letter that identified them by tax lot. So all that happened. We took a whole bunch of public review, and there's a summary of all that public review in the sheet there in front of you, including people asking us to double check our work. And so after we finished that round of meetings, we had a long list of places people wanted to double check our work. We reconvened the committee. We drove back out and looked at all those places. We did make some adjustments. We think that there were places where we were off by a few tax lots, and we moved the line in or out just a little bit. And then we finished that process, and we went out to a public hearing. We held a public hearing here in McMinnville. We had 7 people come to the public hearing, and 1 person testified. And that gentleman testified that we should provide more fire protection, and we should move our protection over and include Aola Hills and Amity Hills, and provide fire protection there as well. That's a little outside the scope of this project. That's a different question about moving the line, so we appreciated the comments. Then we got back together with the committee, and we reviewed the document from the hearings officer. That was on January 11th. And the committee, after considering that, approved the draft classification map to be final. And we have a copy of that map here we can share with you if you'd like to look at the draft, the final classification. In the end, there were 1,380 tax lots that were added to the land base considered forest land. There were 60 tax lots that were dropped out of that, and there were some 990 tax lots that had a change in acreage. So maybe they had 27 acres as forest land, and now they have all 40 acres, for example. So the total is about 2,300 tax lots that are added to the classification. But to me, what that shows is that we haven't been paying attention to this for the last 40 years. Homes have been built in that rural interface, and they're part of that fire protection environment. And most of those are small parcels with a home on them.
Mike, do you know about how many, you talk about that many parcels, about how many gross acres were added due to this last, we took 60 away, and we had, about how many gross acres we added?
So the acreage total, we were just working on that, and I have that number. I think I have it right here, actually. It was about 25,000 acres.
Yeah.
It looks like we had it, yeah. And so I think we talked about this, we charge basically $1.25 or $1.16, depending on which place you're in. But that doesn't add to the budget. It really just spreads it differently across, because everybody's rate goes down a little bit. As more people pay into the system, it just spreads it differently around those folks that are part of the system.
The only ones who went up were the ones who went up before.
From zero.
And I'll tell you, a lot of people will really understand it. Maybe Walt could speak to this too, but a lot of folks, when they learn about it, and have a chance to think about it and talk about it, and especially what happened in California this last year, I think that really, I had a number of people come and apologize and say, hey, I was really upset about this and thought about it, and maybe I overstepped what I really think, when they kind of backed off. But I'll tell you, there are a handful of people who are very upset about this, and for a set of reasons that are, I understand. They are struggling to make ends meet. This is yet another tax in their minds. They pay the rural fire departments, and they have a hard time distinguishing between the services that we provide and that the rural fire department provide. And so, I can understand that. You may hear from those folks. And essentially, we've talked to them, a couple of them. We've gone down and stood in their front yards and looked at the environment around, and in our best firefighting experience, determined in the definition of classification in the committee, looking at the rules and how we apply them everywhere else. The bottom line is they qualify, and we couldn't throw them out.
Where are most of those located?
The most ones that are most upset are the ones that are in the valley bottoms, like up Baker Creek or Little Mine Creek. Yeah.
Go from the valley.
And so they're so close to the forest that anything that starts in their property immediately becomes a risk, or any fire coming over the hill towards them they're in the middle of it. Right. But yet they don't have any trees. They have ground that spreads wildland fires that meet the definitions, but in fact the committee said that they really recommend the Department of Forestry change the definition. That we're not talking about forest classification, we're talking about wildland fire classification.
That'd be good.
People hear forest and they
So the Little Minor Creek fire, that did not encourage people to be supportive of this. I can't imagine that folks in that area would even be questioning it.
So there are a few right down, if you recall, where when we went up and toured that fire with you that day, there are folks literally at the bottom of the hill there that are some of the most concerned or aggravated by this. And so it doesn't always paint that picture for folks, and just as Mike described, it's government, it's another tax, it's things of that nature that bother us sometimes. But regardless of what service we're talking about, I think some folks would just see it that way.
Well, it was like Mike had said, the definition of forest land is dictated by the Board of Forestry, and it's in the rules, and that's what we went by as a committee. And the general public, just that definition, they had a really hard time comprehending what that was. And it's forest land or land that's contiguous to forest land, so they might have a grassland field, but they were classified as forest land because they were adjacent to timberland. So most of the people were really good. We only had a few people that were really, the one lady that I really liked, Mike was pretty eloquent about explaining it. He said, well, I really wish we could, you know, come together and settle this. And she says, well, you can, just agree with me.
It's so simple.
Pretty simple.
She has a short-term view, like people would say, you know, I've been here 8 years,
Yeah.
I've never seen a fire.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, that's a pretty small window.
She couldn't see the forest for the trees.
There you go.
Can
Well-
have them talk to folks who've seen it.
I know, I think that more of that sharing would be helpful.
Yeah.
Right.
But the Willamina Creek fire that you mentioned, had that jumped that mainline road, we'd probably been stopping that somewhere around the Willamina city limits or something. So, you know, a lot of times, Department of Forestry is in the business to put fires out, and they do it really well. And sometimes, things look really bad, but they could have been a lot worse, and I don't think the general public understands a lot of that.
Well, we appreciate what we've done. Thank you.
I hope it goes well when you start getting questions. So the next step now, we're working hard with your assessor to get the information to them. So we're gonna file this material with the county and help you get the tax records correct. And so there's a data management, data link that we're working on, and they've been really helpful getting us, make sure we do a strong handoff to the county to get that process done. And then we're gonna mail letters to all those folks we've added. It's a final letter to say, you've been classified as forest land and you'll be assessed for the fee that's coming here. And so that's another opportunity for people to engage in the process. We mailed all those letters before, neighbors talk to neighbors. We think we got a lot of talk. Shouldn't be a lot of people who are surprised by this. But there will be some who either are surprised by it or claim they're surprised by it, and we will do our best to educate them and help them understand. But this will be around where you may get calls in the next month.
Let's say you made the comment that we ignored this issue for so long. I hope we're not going to ignore this issue for that long again and get us back to where
5 years.
That's a sad. I hope we go for 5 years and not get us back into the same situation.
Yeah, so we will try to keep this committee live. You'll have to keep appointing members to the committee, and then we'll review it periodically. In fact, the committee is supposed to meet once a year and review it every 5 years, just so we don't get in that same boat.
Can we take a look at the map?
Yes, please.
This is the current map of who's paying, and a lot of why it's unequitable. Some of these lots just fell out
To tell
through
us the
40,
Legend.
40 years. So the on this map, the orange color they're in our district boundary, which is Highway 47 there. The orange are not paying the assessment, the Forest Patrol assessment for the Department of Forestry. The green colors are. And as you can see, there's stuff way out here in the forest that have fallen through the cracks over the last 40 years of neglect, and that's a lot of what it was cleaning that up. So if you were getting the service, now you're paying for it. I know it's a little bit hard from that distance, but here is, and I know this map says draft, but this is same flavor there. That light tan is still not paying, but the green is paying into the Forest Patrol assessment tax, or assessment. So, I mean, basically, those shapes are similar. The edges or the fringes of it is where there were changes.
Now, this went from the light green to,
That is the Grand Ron, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the tried.
It's just not called out on this map.
Yeah.
okay, I'm just trying to make a distinction, because you see the different small areas compared to what you see on this map here. I just wanted to understand the distinction.
The big change is all these little orange slivers. And there's actually some we couldn't show on here. If this tax lot, 3/4 of it was paying and 1/4 wasn't. And we caught that too, but essentially the biggest thing with all these orange parcels,
Are now included.
they're now included. And the bulk of the committee's time, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was touring this edge and trying to decide, because that was where it was really hard, is where you go from where it clearly spreads wildland fire to where, you know, if you sort of drop into the heavy agriculture where it doesn't spread wildland fire, where do you draw that boundary? And when we went back and re-reviewed what people asked us to re-review, that's where we were finding, was trying to get the edge right, where you can really say, yep, on that side of the road, I'm so sorry. Or in some cases, they wanted it, you're paying, on the other side of the road, you know, you're not. And they look pretty similar, but this one's a little flatter and it's really agriculture, and this is more, you know, scrub, and it's going right into the trees. And so that was the challenge, was the right along the edge.
Well, thank you. Go ahead.
I was just say and you can look on the map, you know, there's a few areas where a lot of tax lots, you know, there's 100 tax lots right there. Eagle Point area, there's a lot of tax lots there, so not a lot of wholesale changes. Like I said, the shape of paying, non-paying pretty much stayed the same.
Yeah, just those, but should have been in one.
Right, exactly.
We had one fellow, you know, suggest we review his area, and, you know, between when he asked us to review it and when we went out to review it, they had a person that was out trying to kill gophers, trying to burn gophers out. And it started a fire, and it went 3/4 of an acre. And we were out there along with the fire department, and so if it had been a little bit windier, you know, that would have threatened his house and gone beyond it. And so I think that kind of, for us and the committee, is pretty dramatic. It's just really need fire protection here.
It's a good argument.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, we appreciate it. Any other questions?
The direct bill, are those like governmental agencies, big private owners?
Folks,
commercial
well,
owners?
basically, if they don't get a property tax statement, then we'll direct
Then
bill
they'll
through
direct
the
bill.
SCMA. So there are some private lands that don't, for whatever reason, they're not paying property taxes, so we'll direct them.
Well, such as the city's watershed.
Yeah, municipalities,
Yes,
governments,
right.
government property.
Great, well, thank you very much, we
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Very
Keep us
good.
posted.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Get any phone calls directly to Mike Cody?
No, Mike, we have your Thank you very much,
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, let's move on to our preliminary consent agenda, which is item C. And item number 1, do you want to go over all of these, Laura?
You don't need to unless there are questions about any
I'd
of
like to
them.
go over, I thought she might be better than endeavor here on item C1, which was 2017-19 CFA. The original agenda we got only took in it only included the VOCA and not the CFA grant, and the original
The dates.
the date was,
Yes.
and the original was for 186,000, this now has been corrected to
Correct.
306,588. So
Yeah.
we have the correct letter, so this one,
Yeah.
here she is right here.
Any questions then?
We're good.
We're good?
We're good.
Thank you for
Thanks
There
for
we go
coming.
for you.
Did you want to?
But you brought handouts for us.
Right,
didn't you?
gentlemen, I saw you and I had a moment of thought, well, do they really need to go to
downstairs or go through security? Sorry.
No,
We wanted to-
no, we were taking a tour.
I would've-
Sorry we're late.
What kind of handouts is
Then I have stuff to do. Thank
It's
you.
very nice to see
Thank
you.
you.
Come by
Thank you for
anytime.
that information.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it was nice of you to
Anytime
drop
we'll carry
in.
that.
Anytime you need a little fresh air.
That was
come on
the
across
easiest
And
street.
thanks for your
all day.
explanation. Thanks for your
Any
explanation.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you, bye. All right, so if we have no other questions about the consent agenda, we'll move on to the non-consent agenda items. And that would be, we'll start with item D1, which is the filling of the Yamhill County Budget Committee position vacancy. And I have submitted or recommended somebody for this vacancy, and thought we would talk about Denny Elmer. Denny Elmer is a business owner, owns Union Block, owns the Oak Bar, owns a number of different, I think you've got that information on your, owns a number of different businesses, and I think if we want to think about running a county like we run a business, having business people on the budget committee is, would be certainly an asset.
And I don't know if the other commissioners have other individuals that are planning on applying. What the board has done in the past is to set up interviews with myself and the 3 commissioners. If you choose to do that, I would suggest you do it relatively quickly, because new budget committee members often like to attend some of the early meetings and not wait till May. So this is something we should do fairly quickly.
I know I had talked to a couple, but after further discussion with the budget committee, does they're going to opt for, as additional different committee positions come up to it in the county to opt for other potential, just like Parks and Rec and stuff like that. So I didn't have any others.
I do have one. It is, I'm surprised that he has not been down and given application, so I will reach out and, I have no problem with Denny. I'm very familiar with him and his various projects, so.
Okay.
But I would like to check on this one person
Sure.
that I did reach out to. I think he'd make a good member.
That'd be great, yeah, and if we can expedite the process, then we can get somebody on board, so that'd be great. Thank
Well,
you.
That's the only one. If he's still not going to
Interested.
move forward, then we can certainly Danny is fine with me.
So then we can revisit this next week
Yeah.
after you have your conversation.
Right, okay, that's
Okay,
great, thank you.
sounds good.
On to item 2, which is discussion of the conceptual ideas from the Yamhill County Gospel Rescue Mission regarding the Lafayette Avenue property. A little background on this, you know, I was kind of lobbying to have this be a youth drop-in center, and for a number of different reasons, the project is not going to be, it's not a good idea to site it there because of the proximity to the shelter and the fact that there are a lot of people that are kids, once they left the drop-in center, would have to be exposed to. So we decided that was probably not a good use of the property. Asked Dave Hageberg and Kay Sawyer if they could think of, because they'd expressed an interest in it, what were some of the ideas that they had regarding a use of the property for the shelter. So they had submitted a number of them, and we've got that listed here. A couple of the things that they have suggested. Anyway, a couple of the things that they had suggested was to use it for, on a short-term basis for families until they get into a stable environment. Another option they suggested was program participants from the life skills program that they could put there that would free up space for homeless individuals in the shelter. Other one is for hired staff, and the other one, overflow capacity for folks in the wintertime, because that's when their highest need is. And then the other suggestion was garden space for the mission so that they could reduce food costs. So I wanted to see what you thought about these suggestions.
Madam Chair, just a couple comments, because I know it was confusing to me, and I think probably everybody is that, to clarify, we refer to that as the Lafayette Avenue property, but it's really not on Lafayette Avenue, it's on 14th Street.
Correct.
So that was confusing to me, but after I read David Kay's thing, I think they identified a lot of good things. I am a little concerned when I see a house like that they might want to turn into transitional. type of housing, but other than that, if that's their recommendation, I'm certainly in favor of carrying out what they would recommend as some of the options that we would use that property, or that they would use that property.
One of the things that I think that the county has in the past and really funded to a great extent their expansion, and so I wanted to make sure that it was going to be something that was going to, build on that. I don't see this as being, I don't know that this would be advisable to have staff living there or to use the building for a garden. I think that if we have several options here. A neighbor has expressed interest. We have options as to whether or not we see that the mission is going to be able to make good use of this. So whatever on this list you think has merit, I was concerned that there were a couple of them that I did not.
I've had conversations with Dave, even back before you were hoping to use it as a youth facility. We looked at that, and they do have a lot of interest. That's going to take a lot of work. I mean, there's going to be a substantial amount of money have to go into the renovation of that. Dave seems to think that he has access to the resources to help make that happen. You said that there is a neighbor who's interested in purchasing the property. So that is another thing that we have to be cognizant of, is putting those properties back on the tax rolls. And so as much as I would like to pursue the activities of the rescue mission, and because of the proximity to that property, and they have articulated uses that I think make a lot of sense for them, I don't want to not recognize the obligation to generate revenue if we can from a piece of property. So does the person who has shown an interest, would we then consider putting it out on public auction if we did not? What's the process?
Well, there's two options. In other words, this can be a property that's auctioned, and then it's up for grabs in terms of the neighbor and anyone else. But this is a separate thing in that we can, as a nonprofit, can either give it to them, lease it to them, or allow them to purchase it for back taxes, whatever,
You can set the price.
Right. So,
You can make a direct sale to the qualified nonprofit corporation for purposes of low-income housing, social services, and a few
Well,
other
no, I
areas.
understand. The neighbor that's interested in purchasing it, though, is who?
I don't want to talk about
Oh,
that.
okay,
It's
well,
fine.
I'm just saying,
You could not
can't-
sell it to a private citizen
Okay,
without
that's
first going
that's
through.
what I
No,
was.
it has to be auctioned.
Okay, that's what I was.
And he
If
is
no one
actually
buys at the
he's an
auction,
investor, he's an
then
It's
actual
not an
neighbor.
investor.
Yeah.
No, so we can't just take the neighbor and go, what would you like to buy? It has to go to auction.
No, that's what I thought.
Okay.
And that's why I wanted to clarify
Sure.
that before we
Right.
got too far down the road.
So do we see, to me here, I don't see anything that jumps out and says there is a real, a pressing need at this point. This seems like these would be things that they could use it for, but at $100,000 to rehab the property, which is what the estimate that we got, I think that certainly it's going to be a huge investment for the mission. But I'd like to make sure that we're clear on what we would be giving it to them for, and not just, okay, here's a building, take it, and find something to do with it.
Madam Chair, can you go over again those, if you haven't already, or if you have those two items that you felt did not fall into
Oh,
that?
well, it's a huge lot. It has an enormous potential for a garden, but we thought about that for the drop-in center. But they're talking about using it as a garden space to grow food. Overflow capacity, which is the one that I thought made the most sense. So during the winter, another place for folks to go when they really do need more capacity. So that one seemed to me to make sense. I didn't think it was appropriate to use it for staff, for hired staff to live there. And I didn't think it was appropriate for the life skills program. So in other words, people in the life skills program would then move in there, freeing up space in for homeless individuals.
Did you say, Commissioner, did you say hired staff to live there or hired staff to use it as office?
Live there. Live there.
Yeah,
I understood it was going to be used as offices.
That
so
was my
they could clear
understanding,
out
too.
the
More
space
room out
in
of
the
it.
other facility and use that for housing.
Yeah, 'cause I'm not opposed to using it for offices, you know, I'm not, definitely not for giving it to them to use for hired staff to live. But to be able to put administrative offices or classrooms and stuff, so they can free up more room in the mission itself and recover housing there, that.
Well, that's what I
That's what I
understood, so maybe I misunderstood, but when Dave and I were talking originally, I understood he wanted to be able to move office and administrative activities to that building so he could free up additional space in the main building there.
So I think at this point, since we're not really clear on the exact plan that the gospel mission has, I think maybe my suggestion would be is that we ask Dave and Kay to put together something a little more substantial, taking out the option of the garden space and the staff, if that's agreeable, and say, can you come to us with more of a plan to see whether or not it's a fit?
What is the objection to the garden space?
Well, I'm thinking if we're looking at the function of the mission, I don't particularly see that space, that house, that resource being used as a garden when we've got so much. If you look at, for instance, where YCAP is getting an awful lot of their produce, they're sometimes overflowing with produce that they get from where, for instance, Church on the Hill is growing food. So I don't see that as critical.
Okay.
I agree.
I mean, it's a location with a house, albeit in bad repair, that could be used for something. So to say, okay, we're going to grow vegetables here, you know.
Yeah, I think that was an ancillary use to the function of the house itself, but to utilize, as you indicated, it is a large lot.
Right.
And that it could serve that function and also create an activity for the people who are there in residence, or at least moving toward independence, to work a garden and help grow their own food and have a sense. So that was, again, in the conversations I've had with Dave, that was the way I understood that conversation. So what I would prefer is we set this aside, have Dave and Katie come and actually make a presentation. We can ask questions, and I think it would make a lot more sense.
So then we'll put this off, we'll continue it, we'll have Kay Sawyer and Dave Hageberg sort of flesh these out and come back and make a case for the mission utilizing this property. And then we can determine,
If we want to move that direction, or
Christian?
One other thing you might want to think about as you work through this is, in the event you do transfer it to the mission, let's say they want to rehab the building and use it for overflow space, get into the project, realize it's going to cost them more than they thought or take longer, and then they decide, well, we're simply going to turn around and sell the property. Think about what you might want to do in terms of that eventuality.
it would revert back.
But only if we put
If we put it
restrictions or
in the
limitations
agreement.
like that
Sure.
into the agreement.
Okay.
So those are
Alright,
things
great.
that we can discuss as when they're
If we determine
making
that's
their
the correct
presentation.
way.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just put that off for, maybe in a week. You have time
Dave,
in
I
a
don't
week?
think gets back till
Coming on a
Tuesday.
week.
Yeah, he won't be
So,
back for.
we'll just let them know we're working on, we'll
Yeah.
get a date.
Yeah, and they may need some time to
Sure.
discuss it.
And we've had
Okay,
that
so-
on our books for a while, you know,
Right.
so it's not like it's got to be done immediately.
So let's move on to discussion of the Dayton properties. So we had,
You mean Newburgh?
Habitat.
oh, let's do Habitat first, sorry. So let's do the, item number 3, discussion of the property located at 207 West 4th Street in Newburgh and Newburgh area Habitat for Humanity's interest. Thanks for coming, appreciate it. Come on up.
Sorry again for being late.
No, come on up.
No, you're not late, we're just now getting
We're
to
just
it.
jumping.
Oh, yeah,
We're just getting
that's
to
right. Well, look, so I'm Rick Rogers, the Executive Director of Newburgh Area Habitat for Humanity. This is Ron Wolf, a board member and our treasurer, so anyway, so thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Yeah, the money guy, right?
All right.
Pull up a chair.
Okay. Full disclosure, Rick is my son's rugby coach.
There you go.
So-
There you go.
Oh,
There you go.
okay, that changes
That's right, right, there we go.
things an awful lot.
And did I say Max is excellent? Did I say that? Great player.
Sorry.
Great player. No, sorry.
Say no more.
That's right, right. Do you want me to launch in?
Yes,
I will.
please.
Okay. So we came to hear about this property through Joe Hannon, our city manager, contacted us and said, hey, take a look at this. It may go up to auction. Sent a note to Christian to say that we would be interested. He shared the statute that explains, for low-income housing. So we hope to qualify. The thing is, where we are right now, a couple of you have been out to the build site in the past. We're finishing the houses the last house there on 6th and Blaine. So I mentioned that property particularly because that land was donated in the same sort of situation, by the city of Newburgh. That was just surplus property for them. It wasn't for tax reasons. It was surplus property because they moved the animal shelter out to Sandoz. So we've got that project that's done in about a month. We've got another house that's under construction on 8th and Blaine. The foundation's in for that one. We'll start framing as soon as we get this other one done. And then otherwise we've got one other lot we purchased, and that's it. So for us, it is by far the most difficult challenge. We're trying to sell these houses for something on the order of $200,000 to the families. That's the first mortgage. Generally, the second's about $50,000 for us. They appraise at about $250,000. It is targeted to very low income people that otherwise wouldn't be able to get into a house. So over the years, and I've been with the affiliate for almost 20 years, I guess. Yeah, amazingly enough. But we started to see now, what's to me is really cool. We started to see that the families have maintained the stability. That's what really we had hoped for, and the stability is best shown through kids going to college. Actually, I saw a kid at church over the weekend who was here at Linfield. That first one in his family I'm sure. Well, I can't say I'm sure. Habitat can't take all that credit, but at least the stability of the house enabled that. So that's really what we're trying to do, and it's developing wealth for the family, stability is wealth, and the sense of community. And the other thing, practically, is it does, as soon as the house is built, the county has been good enough to waive the taxes until the home is sold, but then it goes back onto the tax rolls. So there is a payment, and that's a part of their mortgage payment is taxes and insurance. So. And then otherwise, and I think they've said in the letter, but otherwise to sort of put it in perspective, we sell the houses for, like I said, about $200,000. $50,000 is often the second mortgage, and the payment comes out to about $680 a month for a brand new 3-bedroom, 2-bath home. So I know in Newburgh anyway, you can't approach anything under $1,500 for a 2-bedroom apartment anymore. So that's it. So. We are hoping that you might see clear to work with us regarding this property on 4th. So the other thing is we did our sort of due diligence, did check it out. It is buildable. It's a small size lot, but it's grandfathered. The house itself looks to be a tear down. It's been abandoned for quite a while. So, but the plan would be, again, most likely a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in that location.
So Rick, the lag time from the time the project begins to the time that the property taxes are being paid, would you say what, is a couple of years?
Well, hopefully not. I mean, knowing that you'd like to see this one get back on the tax rolls, we'd bump it into the queue, and so it would be our next build if that were to go that way. And I'd say 9 months to a year.
And your list of folks who are waiting for homes?
Yeah, we do not keep a waiting list. And part of the reason for that is that it can be a long period of time. So what we do instead is we'll accept 4 or 5 families at one time because we know that's the land we've got to build. So if we open up the process again, what we'll do is we'll select 2 families for the next 2 lots that we've got. But we don't keep a backlog. But I've got probably, 30 or 40 pre-applications at the office now. And each time we do a informational meeting for homeownership, we can count on 30 to 40 families.
Well, in the last cycle we had, and correct me if I'm wrong, how many people that applied submitted
Yeah,
requests to
right.
be considered was pretty substantial.
It
Most
was.
we ever had.
Yeah, and it was, I think we had 20 full applications, and this was gonna be the full application is quite lengthy. I mean, it's a process in itself, so, and from that we selected 4. But there were 40 at the original meeting, so but again, it's, a zero interest mortgage is pretty attractive. But the other side of that, and I'm sure you hear that from our counterparts here in McMinnville as well, is that the program's not for everybody. You've got to be willing to do the sweat equity hours on the project. You've got to have a consistent work history because there is a mortgage, even though it's zero interest. And you have to be willing, and probably one of the most challenging things is, you're there and you're the family. And all these people are sort of working for your benefit. And that can be real uncomfortable for lots of people. I know it'd be uncomfortable for me, but then that can be uncomfortable. But when we find the families, they are pretty special, and that's pretty neat.
So the current home you're working on, you said the completion about a month?
Yeah.
And then if you have people already lined up
Mhm.
for the next build, and you
Right.
said you would move this one into the next one.
Right.
So you would probably begin construction then in 6 to 8 weeks?
Yeah, well, no, because we've got a house in between. We've got one that, we've got the foundation in and we're starting to frame. So there's one other.
So you would begin construction on this then for probably 8 months down the
Yeah,
road?
probably about that.
Yeah, okay. And then approximately 6 to 7 months after that,
After that.
you'd have to move in, so we'd be looking at 15 to 18 months before this would go on the test. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Getting
Yeah, the other thing, and Christian had mentioned this as well, one of the things, is we have the right of first refusal for the life of the mortgage, so for 30 years. And what we do is, and this is somewhat different from other affiliates, we make it that for every dollar that a family pays in principal, if they decide to sell anytime before 30 years, we'll give them what they've paid in. So, using a sort of quick math, if they were in for 10 years, they paid $70,000 in, we just give that to them, and that's the sale for the house. So there's no additional equity, there's nothing like that. But it's almost like a forced savings plan in that, if they do change, and life changes, and that does happen. But that's how we do it. So that's how we also retain, that it is going to be affordable for the life of the home.
So you guys hold the mortgage?
Yeah, we service our own notes, yeah.
And then if you have a sale, then you find another qualifying family and
Yep.
try to get them back in.
Yeah, we'll buy the house back, and we've done it a couple of times. In fact, this last cycle, why we brought in as many families as we did, we had a couple houses that just oddly came back to us. One was a divorce, and that was part of the settlement, and the other, the family wanted to move back to Ohio to see family. So it does happen.
You buy the house back for their equity in
Yep. Yeah, for their principal payments, for what they put in principal payments. So, and the reason, there used to be a shared equity component, this is probably more detailed than you need, but there used to be a shared equity component where they'd be earning towards the second mortgage, the value there as well, and potentially the market value. But what we found was in this real estate market, it became impossible for us to buy a house back, because all of a sudden we're paying $150,000 or $200,000 to buy a house back. So that's why we've limited it. But I think we're still, I think our treasurer concurs, we're still quite generous with the program.
Just so you know, this is the property they're talking about. It's been a while since we've looked at properties, but
Oh, yeah.
there is a structure on it, but it is covered in trees. It's not exactly a property or a home
3,600 square
anymore.
foot lot, small or
Yeah.
type of lot.
Just so you guys have a refresher.
That's the one that doesn't look like there's a house there.
There
Yeah.
is. You can see if you go to the side of the property.
You
and
can see it's stuck back in there.
It's a tiny little thing.
Yes, it's a secluded,
Yes. That's the market.
Mature vegetation.
Yes. It's a vacation.
Bungalow.
It's a vacation
When
spot.
you look at this, where it says mature vegetation.
Yeah. Mature, that's mature, all right, that vegetation.
Quaint and secluded.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Well, I will get out this, my banking hat and other aspect of this, our challenges, as Rick mentioned, with finding land and being able to secure land that we can build and make affordable is our, by far, our biggest challenge. And so it's either through relationships that we develop, people have it in their heart that they want to gift it or make some accommodations to keep it affordable, and the benefits of working with a nonprofit and this agenda and have that passion so we can capture that. Or property that we can develop with multi-units and gather that momentum to make it more affordable and based on the numbers and so forth. So this, and in the Newburgh market, it's out here, we're seeing it everywhere. It's everybody's fighting for that, and we're going up against the builders, developers, and people doing their research and due diligence to tackle these properties as they come online. And again, then that becomes a whole different proposition. They're not concerned about affordable housing, but it becomes a different agenda for them and the development costs that go with that when we can circumvent that through our system. And that's really our only way to get a leg up to provide this. And we're seeing the growing need with the number of applicants as we continue to progress. It's growing, and demand and need is certainly there for qualified people for these homes.
The city does work with you on those fees and system development charges.
Right, yeah, they've got a provision, for two houses per year, the equivalent of 2 houses per year. And then Parks and Rec there in Newburgh has just raised their fees quite substantially. Yeah, so they've also been able to do that. And the school district does through construction excise tax, they waive that.
The
Yeah.
CPRD is really, that's
They
like
got-
a rich budget they have there.
Yeah, they went up substantially,
Yeah.
but on this.
That adds,
Yeah,
that
that's right.
adds, that
Yeah,
adds
that's
a
right.
lot to the
It-
price of a house.
Yeah, it does.
And that's all
People realize
passed through.
that.
As much as people want to think maybe the developer or builder is going to be kind or generous, that's a hard cost.
He has to build
Takes so long to
that
build
into,
into their
yeah, I
proposition.
saw that and I actually got sticker shock and thought
Yeah.
how much it's gonna cost
So
somebody
this
to
is-
pay that off.
Does the city of Newburgh waive all of their SDCs, or do they give a certain percentage up to those?
No, they waive all of them for 2 houses.
For two houses.
And it's not, I should clarify, it's not specific to Habitat, it's just any,
Affordable.
yeah, but it's sort of written like any self-help, locally based, volunteer-driven home, I mean, they make it so that it's, it sounds pretty much like
Specifically
Habitat.
state habitat.
That doesn't, but it has a lot of the criteria, so.
So, all right, well, thank you. Kristen, at this point,
One other thing to think about too, we talked with Rick and I chatted about this, at the time of judgment, there was just over $5,000 owing in taxes, so we had talked about whether or not the board would transfer the property for $1 or for 0 or for the outstanding taxes in order to provide some money back to the taxing districts. The assessor's office is out at their annual conference, so I don't have a hard number on exactly what the amount of the taxes plus fees plus interest would be today, but we can have that for you by the end of the week. And you can choose to transfer it for that amount, you can choose to transfer it for.
We'll
a different
waive
amount.
Newburgh's share of that too.
I think that sounds like a good idea.
We'll waive Newburgh's share.
Yeah.
So that's just something else to think about.
So can we, maybe what we can do is when we get that number, bring this back and then make a decision based on what we want to do in terms of.
Yeah, the next step then would be to declare it surplus at a formal session, and then we could start working on the transfer details.
Okay. Is that something that makes sense to everybody?
Makes sense
Yeah,
to me.
works for me.
All right, well, thank you, so we'll.
Oh, yeah,
get
yeah,
that
thank you.
number and then.
Yeah, and if there's anything else you need from us, just, please let me know, and I'll leave some of this collateral and all.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Maybe we can
Appreciate
make
it.
this a vet build.
There you go, sure, let's do it. I was on the phone with the VFW this morning on a project we're doing, they're building ramps for some veterans. So, yeah, let's do that, that'd be awesome.
All right, well, we'll continue our
Okay,
discussion.
thank you.
for
Thank you
coming.
so much.
Appreciate it, thank you.
You are
for
welcome on the
everything.
build site anytime, it doesn't have to be an elected
Yes,
assistant
and I
build
learned
day,
how to lay
anytime.
sod.
There you go. All right, thank you so much.
When you go over to the
Thank you.
restore,
Thank you.
that whole lining out there, 1,700 and some feet. What's his name? Myself.
And was it Roy who was working with you?
There's a gentleman who ran for, gosh, he was running for.
Was it Bill Post? Was it Bill?
No,
No?
he was running for federal seat. Anyway,
Yeah.
we did all.
There you go.
Thank you, guys, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's
Appreciate
move
it.
on.
Thanks.
On our
Thank you,
agenda,
guys.
we'll move on to item 3A, and that's the date and properties.
Oh, that's mine, there's my jacket, I'm screwing. Sorry, it's on my jacket.
So just to bring you up to speed on the Dayton properties, there's been some discussion, Christian and I, Mayor Wojtowski, and basically there are a couple of different elements at play. Number one is we wanted to determine whether or not we wanted to either give the, and this is a little kind of the cart before the horse because we never did develop a board policy for what we want to do with these properties. So now we're discussing each individual property without having the foundation of a policy. So I think we need to do that sooner than later because we've now had 3 discussions on 3 separate properties and we don't have, we just don't have a policy. So I think we need to address these because they are in play. But anyway, that's something we should probably.
Well, we had talked about whether or not we were going to do anything in writing or if we were going to have some general guidelines
Right.
that we were going to follow for most of these properties. And we talked about some of those guidelines. If you want, we can certainly, I can formalize some of those and bring them back.
I think we talked about doing that at our next work session, where we're gonna talk about surplus properties.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I
that's
don't have a
something-
ton of detail, but it tries to encapsulate a lot of the issues we've been discussing, in
Well, it's a
sort of
good
a
place to
step-by-step
start, but
process.
it may not be everything we want to be. I mean, at least it's a good place to
Basic.
guidelines. are
Start with some guidelines and see if they wanna,
Yeah, that to me makes
Sure.
makes good sense, and then that will be certainly the guidelines we would follow. And hopefully, as we sort of get deeper into this, it'll become a little bit more systematized and then formalized from year to year.
Okay, so back to the Dayton property. So we have 12 lots, and the city of Dayton is interested in what they're calling workforce housing. So without that definitive income level definition, what this is for people who, for instance, they couldn't find a housing for a potentially new city manager because all the houses have been bought up by people in Portland. They're upwards of 350, and they don't live there, so they're absentee landlords. So it's how do you get housing for people who want to live there and work there and make it affordable? So one of the things that we've been talking about, Christian and I and Beth, is that we've got a couple of things to consider. The homeowners association is intact and it's registered, so we're going to have to deal with that. So do we basically just say?
Yeah, they will need to be included, at least in the discussion, whoever it is that takes the project forward, if that's a project that the county remains involved in, or if that's a project led by the city. Presumably, that existing homeowners association is going to want to have a voice in the development of the remainder of these lots.
So the will, in terms of just what the mayor has been saying, is that they would rather see single-family, non-shared wall, private homes on those lots, and she doesn't believe there would need to be any lot line adjustments or zoning changes or anything based on the fact that you can expand the size of the lots and still put those single-family housing. So
But again, all of that will need to be resolved with the HOA and the CCRs.
Right.
Those
So
lots are pretty darn small.
They are
I
small.
recall.
So if you put 8
Are they that
instead of
big?
12.
So you'd be looking, presumably you'd be looking at like combining 2 lots, so you'd have one house here, one house here, one house here.
Yeah.
So instead on the 8, you might get 4, and then combine these down here, and you might get 2 more. But it's basically this side of the development that we still have. So yeah, they are pretty small.
Yeah.
And neither Todd or I have done any work following up on what the mayor has said, her planning officer has told her, but presumably they know what they can do. But again, changes to that subdivision will require discussion and working with the HOA. And maybe they would be comfortable seeing the nature and the texture of that subdivision modified. Hard enough.
The other thing is how involved do we want to be? And my recommendation is that we let the city take this project, and the only proviso we have is to say, look, we'd like to see this used for this stated purpose. We don't want anybody flipping them and making any money, and make sure that once we transfer the property or sell the property, and my recommendation would be to sell it for taxes and fees, and also not to disclude private developers in this. Because if you had, for instance, community home builders they're going to do low-income housing, which means you have to have people building it. You have to build your own house.
Those aren't really low income though. When you look at the community house compared to Habitat,
Well-
it's a distinctly different.
My point is that if we're asking this to be workforce housing, and you then bring in someone like community home builders where you have to build your own home, then people who are working, let's say, at the hospital or wherever, aren't gonna be able to work full-time and build their home. So I'm suggesting that we not make it one of those projects, but we say to them, you guys can just work into however you, whatever your paperwork says, is that it says that you can't turn around and flip it. But that doesn't have to be us.
I agree with you, Madam Chairman. I like that route, that we sell to them for whatever that is. Let them do, we put some very minor basic requirements and then sell to them, and then they have to meet all of their requirements. Because I don't want to get to the point, if they don't build 3.5 years or whatever we talked about before, maybe it reverts back to us. But I would rather, if we're gonna have Dayton control, I'd rather have Dayton control it, based on whatever few minor recommendations or whatever guidelines we want to put in there. I'd rather have them control, but I like your guidelines that you said so far, so.
And private developers,
Yes.
so they don't get aced out. Because if they don't have to buy the dirt, then they're gonna be able to build a house that's affordable because they're not having to purchase the land.
And I think private developers should be able to go in there.
It depends, I think what you have to think about is what degree of enforceability do you want built into this? If you want some very limited, sort of open-ended guidelines to the city of Dayton, encouraging them to develop their own program, well then, if they develop a program that for whatever reason the commission's not satisfied with or pleased with, what sort of clawback or what sort of enforceability do you want built into the agreement so you could potentially claw that property back? It's you sort of have to at the outset. I think it's important to decide how involved in that end of it you want to be. For example, if we do sell it to them and they don't develop it for several years, is that acceptable, or do we want to put time limits on it? You want these properties developed and back on the tax rolls within a certain amount of time. So all of that has to be should be thought through, in my opinion, and we need to have a clear understanding of what requirements you might want to see placed on this project. And if it's simply City of Dayton, here are the properties for the outstanding taxes, go do good things with it and build what you define in your community as workforce housing, and we'll be satisfied with that. That gives them all kinds of flexibility. If we want to put some additional limitations that it has to be low income, that is a percentage of the median income in the area, much like Habitat uses or other nonprofits use to determine eligibility, those should probably be discussed and included in any kind of an IGA with the deed or in the deed itself as a restriction.
Well, there's a definite distinction between low income and affordable or workforce.
Sure.
I think, and so I think we've got to be very careful about how we put that in there. What I would like to see us do is, in the agreement, in 18 months, they come back to the board outlining where their plan is, what they anticipate doing, where they are with the homeowners association, where they are with the type of development, that kind of thing. And then if we are still in accord, then we continue moving forward with our agreement to transfer the property to them. And the building must begin or be substantially underway within a 3-year period so we can get this property back on the tax rolls. And they would then have some defined, and we can put in what that 18-month looks like, what the kinds of things that we judge they should have in place and moving forward. And if they like that thought, fine, then they move forward with the project. And the end result is they get the property if in fact they meet those criteria. And it's not like you're giving them pretty much full reign, or free reign, only in as much as we are gonna say that they've got to have certain, the things that we just articulated or that we want to see happen with the property. And, but the bottom line is that we want it back on the tax rolls in a relatively short period of time, 3 years.
So I would think, what is your short list of things that, I would be thinking about, what is your short list of things that you would like to see the county put in there as a, these are, conditions and requirements.
We'd like to see.
So I know for me, it would be that the private sector is included in this, and
Yeah, that's
that
easy
kind of
enough.
stuff.
You just don't exclude anyone. You go through an open
An
bidding
open bidding,
process.
RFQ or RFP.
And some kind of a document from the homeowners association being in accord with the city's
development.
plan moving forward, so that you don't get there to the last minute and have a big hiccup.
That's a good.
They're gonna have to, because they are registered and they are been
Yes.
attacked.
Yeah.
And they exist, we don't know how active they
It
are.
needs to
Yeah.
be documented so that there's no.
Right, that has to happen,
Yeah.
and they're not, who knows what they're gonna think about this going forward, but
That's
it
it. So
has
it's
to be
gotta,
part of
it forces the city then to make sure that they've
Right.
built a relationship with that group.
So would you
before
prefer that in that 18-month period, they have gone through their solicitation process and then come to you with sort of the plan that they have developed and the developer that they've selected? Or are we
See,
expecting
18
to be
months,
quite that far along?
I don't know that we've agreed on 18 months, I think that seems like kind of a long,
Well,
I don't know how long it might take them
how long it would
to
take,
get
Yeah,
that.
but you've got a lot of
They
steps.
have a lot of paperwork they have to go
Yeah,
through.
I
their
mean, what we
accounts,
gonna do,
their
we're talking about a
engineering.
government entity. I mean, it's not like you're private, you've got a lot of.
It
Dot your
could
i's
be
and cross your
crafted in
t's.
such a way that it's like an option agreement. They have an option to buy the property from the county within an 18-month period. If they're ready in 3 months, great. If it takes them 6 months, great. But they would have as long as perhaps 18 or 12 or, whatever number you.
I thought
you
18
thought
months
was-
was kind of short myself.
Well, I think
an opportunity
if
to
Work
develop their
expands to
plans.
fill
Well, if the
amount of
only
time
thing
to
the
give
city
it.
was working on is this project, that would be different. But when you look at what it takes to operate the city with the kind of budget Dayton has, I think I want to give them enough time to do it and do it right, and not, say, if we say be back here in 6 months with a design or plan or anything,
Yeah, I don't think the time limit is really the first thing we need to be kicking around. I think we need to,
Well, the other
that's
thing you need to
aside.
think about too is what qualifies as workforce housing.
Correct.
Adopt a definition.
Yeah, it's not low income housing, and it's not Habitat or community home builders housing. It's housing for people who are working and can't find a place to live.
I think there's a lot of definition. I know I've seen some, you've probably seen some definition around how different counties, how the state, how different municipalities define workforce housing, and trying to take those and come up with what we feel for us is the best of what workforce housing is. I don't think that would be a lot of real difficult.
I mean, are you thinking you want them to sell the houses below a certain amount? Do you want the monthly payments to be below a certain amount? Do you want the mortgages to be structured a certain way? What are the criteria that would meet that qualification? If does the house need to be priced below $300,000? Does it need to be a certain size? Some of those things.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's right. I mean, we do have definitions of low income and even affordable.
Yeah. Well,
And
and
those are based on
workforce.
percentages of median income in the area.
because, the city manager at his salary level and somebody working in the public works department, they both work for the city, their ability to afford a house is significantly different. And so I think you've got to be careful. Workforce, affordable, low income, those are very broad definitions.
Right. Well,
I think that if we're gonna put stipulations in there, we have to have our definition of what that means for them, so they know what they're working toward.
and the other thing is again, going back to the fact that the builder, the developer doesn't have to buy the actual land. That
Yeah.
presumably
The
makes
city
it
transfers to
Significantly more
significantly
affordable.
less expensive than, you know, anything else. So it's really up to them. The only other thing is let them put in all of the other restrictions that have to do with, you know, Mayor Wachowski talked about, well, how do you get something here that says you have to live here? I said, I don't know how that's gonna work, and I don't know that we wanna get involved in that, but that should be something that they get to work
They
on.
need it.
So maybe we can just say that, we can come back with our short list of things we'd like to see on that.
If we or the city are interested in ensuring that these properties are sold at an affordable level and then not flipped, you're gonna need some sort of a long-term structure similar to what Habitat does.
30
Someone who
years
either carries the
Habitat
mortgage or you're gonna need some entity to sort of manage that going forward. And then how long are you thinking? 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 30? Because again, if you're not focusing on low income and you're really just wanting to be affordable, for workforce housing, maybe the folks getting into the house when they wouldn't otherwise have been able to is enough of an accomplishment. And then you would allow them to turn around in a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, and sell the house, you know, for more if they wanted to. I know then 5 years down the road, you're left with not enough affordable houses again, potentially, but there will need to be some sort of structure, and again, if we're gonna be involved in that, we can try to work that in, but if we're pushing that to the city, you know, that's something the city will have to do.
Well, and that can be one of the things that the city provides within whatever time period. I said that can be on the list of
Right.
I think you'll
items
find-
for them.
Right.
You'll find entities like Habitat who can work within that structure. That may be where your private developers don't have a structure like that and maybe it would be the city who would step forward and
Well,
say, you know, we'll somehow be involved and set it up in such a way that would try to ensure that they keep these houses affordable if that's the goal.
Well, you know, you take a private builder, he's gonna go out and get a building loan that he would then build the house and sell it, and then that moves in, he gets his payback, he gets paid out for building a home. If the city is the owner of the property and he goes in there and builds a house, who's gonna make certain he gets paid for that house if it's on a long-term mortgage? And so those are things that can throw a wrench in this, where you're wanting a private builder involved with a property that he doesn't own that property, the city does, and so, I don't know,
Well, if the city owned it and they hired a builder to build it for them, they would have an
they
agreement.
guarantee, yeah, if the
Exactly.
city
City.
would guarantee that,
Yeah.
whether, if they don't sell that property right away, or sell the building right away, and the builder's sitting there waiting for his, does the city have the money to pay that builder off, so.
Well, I think we can, I'm sorry.
No, I think you'll find that, knowing like we all do a lot of contractors, I think there's those local contractors that can't even find a lot or two to build on because so many being built by industrial type builders. I see no matter whether they keep them as single wall, whether they combine the lots to single family residence, private builders, I see no problem with private builders wanting to come through, come in and build one or two or whatever. I see no problem with that.
I
And
see
the other
them
thing
wanting
is-
I don't, yeah.
but they've gotta be sure that.
That's to say, they're gonna have to
They have to be
make sure
paid.
that they could get, the thing about it is they don't have to, if they make a good return on their investment, they don't have to cover the cost of the ground, you know, the
Mhm.
property itself, you know, I think you can find.
But if they don't
Excuse
own the
me.
ground, it's gonna be hard for them to get a loan to build the thing. And so they've gotta have the
Yeah.
wherewithal to build that.
These are things that I think we should take more of a hands-off approach and let the city work on these details. And the only thing really, what we want to do is we want to say, we know you have a need, you've expressed a need, and now you need to figure it out on your time, on your dime, and we'll be happy to sell you the property for what the back taxes are.
We'll we enter into an option agreement. They have the option to purchase the property within a fixed amount of time. You know, within that time frame, they come to us with their plan. If we are all in agreement with their plan, then the property sale moves forward.
I think their outcome and their vision really isn't any different than ours.
No.
I mean, I think
Right.
we all want the same thing, but I agree with the chair that really it's like, okay, these are the things, you know, that it's on your dime now, it's on your dollar, we'll sell it to you for back taxes, and these are things we would like to see, you know,
And one of those
There you
might
go.
be a situation where a private developer comes in and they can adjust the lot lines, and this developer can build 4 to 6 freestanding homes that they can sell below the current market, and maybe that is enough for the city. Maybe the city, that to them is progress and is success, even if one or more of those buyers buy those homes and then turn around and sell them. You know,
How much
in a
control
short
on
period of
that?
time. If you want a limitation or somehow try to make sure that these stay in that initial ownership or stay affordable, that's where the city will likely work with a partner who can help facilitate that longer term goal.
These properties are currently owned by the county,
Correct.
that are in an area that has a homeowners association.
Correct.
What is the power of the homeowners association if these lots go to auction?
75% of the homeowners in the association need to agree to vote to change the structure.
No, even if
But
we go
if
to
they
a-
want to buy,
if
if
we
they want
put
to
it
buy
on-
the properties, they would be subject to
the homeowner
the
association.
CC&Rs.
Okay, so that would be part of their purchase if they came in and bought it at auction.
Correct.
Yeah.
Unless they work with the HOA, I mean, the HOA, who knows, maybe they'd rather see 8 single-family, you know, homes in there than they would 12
Yeah, it's not a big,
common law.
it's not a super large area.
No.
I mean, if they followed the original development plans, that's some pretty
Well, I
tight
know.
houses.
Yeah.
The reason I asked the question, if the city does develop a plan, it would make it a lot easier to work with homeowner association with a plan that everybody buys into, than the homeowner association being concerned about them being sold at auction and not knowing what they're.
And I mean, if you'd like, we could reach out to the, homeowners association.
I'd rather them do it.
I think
that-
they should
I
do
think
it.
they should do it.
I think we can belabor this and sit and talk about
Yeah.
details, and really, I don't think that's what we should be doing. So let's just say that, do we agree that we want to get a plan, get a plan
So I
together?
can talk to the city attorney,
Okay.
and if you, Madam Chair, want to have another conversation with Beth, I'll wait to hear from you before I reach out to the attorney, but that's probably where one of the next conversations needs to be, so she has an understanding, so she can start helping the city understand what they're going to need to do if they want to make this work.
Okay. I will do that. All right.
And so we will take these houses and the Midward House and the Lafayette House off of our list of potential auction properties for the moment. Right, okay.
And then we want to work on getting our policies so that we have a clue.
Yeah, we'll have some guidelines that.
And I can see this happening more in the future, and I'd
Sure.
see it
So we'll be
policies.
removing the Newburgh house, the Dayton properties, all of them, as well as the house in Lafayette.
Correct.
On 14th.
14th Street.
Yeah.
Keep them off the foreclosure auction list for now.
All right. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to item 4, and that's discussion of the submittal of a double family trail development fund grant application. Carrie Ann and Kaylee. Oh no, it's just Carrie.
It's
Carrie.
just-
Come on up here and
This
sit
is
up
a
here.
solo.
Karen.
She's
Thank
flying
you so
solo.
much, Commissioners. So we are looking at submitting an application for potentially developing a master plan. This would be not funding the entire amount, but a portion of that. And the Doppelt Family Foundation grant is a grant that is specifically dedicated to trail development with a preference for rails to trails, which we happen to fall into.
Question. Would it not, it would, we have a gap in our Connect 6 grant,
Potentially.
potentially, that would fit within the amount. Wouldn't we be better off to fill that gap and go for this master plan?
So we're still exploring options for filling that gap right now, that would not require us to find a gap funder. We have a little bit of TE money, and so ideally we can flip that over in. So, but
And we
that would
also
certainly
aren't,
be a possibility.
and we are also aren't sure if that gap is actually realistic or not.
Right.
Yeah.
We're checking the numbers.
Well, I just, as being aware
Yeah.
of that piece.
But theoretically, sure.
Yeah, okay.
Although when you read the DAPA grant guidelines, I'm not sure they would fund something like that.
Possibly not. I mean, because it's a small foundation, they would, and it's small governments, this, in 18, they're gonna be spending $95,000, so not much. And they typically, 6 to 8 projects. So they would really like something that they can have a significant impact.
Okay. I just, as I was
Sure, sure.
reading that grant, I thought, well, gee, that doesn't, their emphasis on rails to trails, and we needed some
Sure.
gap funding there, so.
It'd be convenient
But
for us.
I would like to see us move this into the consent agenda.
I have a concern about that, and I know you find that also very hard to believe.
Well, that's why it's here on the non-consent agenda.
Yeah. But I think that we're probably a little lax in doing our due diligence on a farm impact study, and the longer we go and the more involved we get in this process, it's as if we're ignoring the fact that we've determined it would be a good thing, and that it's a good thing to get this thing done sooner rather than later before we keep building upon something that might not have a strong footing. So I'm a little concerned that we're not getting that done, but we continue to act as if it doesn't matter if we get it done.
Well, Todd's already
Todd is working on it.
He is working on
He's
it.
been working on findings.
Not the way I look at it.
I think there's a difference between working on something, because we know, for instance, with the dog ordinance, that took how many years that thing sat on a back burner? So I think working on something and saying that we've got something that's, imminent. I haven't heard of it, so.
Well,
Yeah,
we
me
have
too.
some strict timelines
Yes.
with the TE grant that we need to keep to. And part of that is what Todd is working on, and I think the slated completion for that is the 1st of August. Am I right in the timeline?
Connect Oregon.
For Connect Oregon,
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah, so
And
he
is
has.
it August?
Yeah, he has August of this year, so he has a window of about 8 months to do the land use component of Connect Oregon 6, of which any study would be a part of.
Yeah, as you
Findings,
know,
findings.
and I side with Commissioner Primasic, that I'm a very avid proponent of trail, but like I said, I have to go with Commissioner Starrett that I still think we're almost a year into it now since I've been on the commission, and we're still talking about what a findings versus an actual analysis study and who's going to do it. And it was my understanding that we were going to get somebody that specializes in doing farm impact studies and not just rely on our staff to find findings. I mean, so in this case, I could not, in all honesty.
I'm sorry, that's the first I've heard.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Todd is
Todd
probably
the
the expert in the state as
Be
far
hard
as
pressed to
land
find
use. He's
anybody
been working in it
more,
for.
Yeah.
But what we have to do is satisfy LCDC that we have made a list of findings on adjacent properties, what the impact to their farm practices would be as a result of this trail. We submit that. If they choose to appeal it and LCDC says, well, they have a legitimate appeal, then we have to go back and mitigate whatever that appeal is, if I understand the process. And so that is what we need to do in order to move forward, is provide LCDC with our findings on all of the adjacent properties, and that's what Todd is working on, communicating with the landowners and recognizing what their practices are on that on the properties that abut the rail, the trail, and showing how the trail would or would not impact their farm practices.
So my apologies if this information hasn't been correctly.
I'd like to know how many he's contacted,
Well,
what he's
here's what
found out
here's what I
so
would
far.
suggest, why don't we maybe
Yeah.
have, set a time, maybe in next week or in 2 weeks, to have Todd come to a session and discuss this with the board, so you can hear from him exactly what it is he's working on and what he sees, and we can talk to him in the meantime about his timeline and what he's got going on. So my apologies if that was information that we should have had to use sooner, but my understanding was he was.
I didn't know
starting to work on
apology, I
these
just
things.
didn't know he was out
I
talking
didn't
to,
either.
he was out
Yeah,
talking
he's
to
been
people.
working on this for
Well,
quite
that's
some
news
time.
to me, I didn't know
New to
that.
me too.
But the
I
other
knew.
thing is, the question that I had was, and Commissioner Primizic, you said, we have to satisfy DLCD. And I think earlier, at least I had advanced the notion that perhaps we owe our farmers more than we owe DLCD.
Well, we do, and
Excuse
if
me,
they
if I could
take
just
an
finish,
issue,
please.
okay, go ahead.
So if we say, well, we're only gonna do what we have to do by 219, what is it?
215, 296.
215, 296. So we're only gonna do that, then we're, we've covered ourselves. But if we're gonna do more in terms of being responsive to our farmers' concerns, I think that's what we need to do, is go above and beyond to listen to them and not just do what we have to do.
I don't disagree, and I've said it more than once, that if there is a concern on the part of any of our adjacent landowners as to an actual impact to their farming practices, we will do everything within our power to mitigate that concern. And I stand by that, but that being said, what we need to do first, before this thing moves forward, is we've got to come up with a set of findings. That's what a farm impact study is.
Well, exactly, and that's what we're waiting for,
And
and
that's
that's
what
what we need to
Todd's
see
working
happen.
on. Yeah, and that's
I
what
was
Todd's
not
working
aware
on.
that he was
Yeah.
working on it.
And
Yeah.
once that happens, and then if any of our adjacent landowners have a problem with what we've come up with, then that has to be dealt with and mitigated. I do know that when we went through the various sessions showing the trail, meeting with landowners throughout the charrette process, and there were a number of concerns raised, and we addressed them at that time, talking about vegetation barriers, talking about people who run the cattle back and forth across the trail, putting up arms so that we can stop traffic on the trail while they move the cattle back and forth. We've had a lot of those conversations, and we will continue to have those as they're raised in order to mitigate, to the extent possible, any of the concerns of the farmers. The fact that the trail is there and that there will be a trail there, whether they like that or not, I mean,
Tough luck?
no, but if it's affecting their ability to use
Mhm.
their land, then we need to work with that, period.
And that's gonna come up later on in the agenda regarding pesticide spraying, and that's an accepted farm practice that might be impacted by having people walk.
It could be, and those will have to be mitigated. And it's just like that document I put in your basket, how they're working on being able to direct spray so that does not have the impact. And that's, all of those things, but we have to be aware of them, we have to work with them. But it's not the possibility, it's what is a real actual impact and how do we deal with it.
Right.
So-
So again, we'll just have to, make sure that this, people actually have the opportunity to express their concerns.
And I think, Christian, you're right, if we had something where Todd came to us and I'm like, no, we're X number of properties, how many of them looked at, how many of the farm impact, how many impacts, let's say how many people, because I don't have the faintest clue if we've talked to 50 people, 100 people, 30 people, and what those potential impacts are.
Well, it's adjacent landowners.
Well, that's a sign I'm meeting,
Yeah.
along for, that's what I needed Jason.
Yeah, I will find out where he is in the process and we can report back, but I don't know how that directly or indirectly impacts the.
Well, and what's the time limit on this?
So this particular grant is due on the 31st, which is why we're bringing it up now.
Yeah.
And this would be towards a master plan. That would be the intent. And we're still working with the foundation to see if this is something that they would particularly fund. They like substantial projects that deal with trails, and so we've asked, is this something that would fall within your guidelines? And if they say no, then that's something that we would very likely hold off on until we have a more substantial project in the future, because this is a small foundation, and so we would like to use the resource wisely. So if they don't like the idea of the master plan, then we may hold off until such a time we're ready for a trailhead, and then talk to them about something like that. So I just wanted it to be, we wanted to bring it up so that we could still explore that option within the time frame.
So, you had a recommendation, Commissioner, that this go onto the consent agenda, is that right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I'm going to respectfully request that it remain on the non-consent agenda. All right, so on to item 5, if there's no other discussion on that. The consideration of the submittal of a letter of opposition regarding the proposed Oregon Occupational Safety and Health Administration, Oregon OSHA, 150-foot pesticide buffer. And this is something that I brought up for a number of years. Commissioner Olson brought it up recently, and I have a letter that I would ask the board to support, and that is the fact that the Oregon OSHA is proposing a buffer zone which would impact farmers significantly in terms of a buffer for pesticides. This is a lot more restrictive than the federal OSHA, and that puts the state of Oregon as one of the significantly more restrictive than OSHA. And this is a letter that we would send to Oregon OSHA that says we're concerned about the proposed rule changes because it would impact farmers. And as you know, this just doesn't have to do with people along the trail who might have to curtail their farming practices, but anybody in our rural county. So do we have a...
And that letter is just a letter of concern or a letter of opposition, or?
It's the letter that
We talked about.
and I can send it to everybody. It basically just,
No, it's got, I see that word opposed in there, it's fine
Well,
with
it's
me.
in opposition
I see that word opposed.
to,
Even
strongly
though,
opposed.
even if you all agree on this though, the fact that you wanted public feedback on this, you may want to keep it off the consent agenda.
okay?
Okay. However,
'Cause
I agree with the letter.
I would think we would have some people Thursday, if it's not some people, part of the general would probably, maybe one or two, some people would probably show up one. Speak to that being strongly, I'm sure the people that'll show up are strongly opposed to it also, so.
Right. So that would be for Thursday. Now, would they make the comment during public comment or during this item?
Right
Very
before
good.
this item.
Okay. So, all right, so then we'll keep that on the non-consent agenda. And the next item is number 6, the discussion of the revision of the work session schedule.
So Commissioner, you were gonna bring up, possibly, moving the road video tour in order to discuss the county administrator recruitment on January 30th.
Yes, we had set up a virtual tour with Public Works, and I was wondering if there was agreement that we could move that down, since it's not really critical that we see that right now, that we move up the discussion of the county administrator recruitment, because that is a little more imminent in terms of the time.
I'm not in the opposition to move those.
And if we do that, then we would be moving the road tour work session to February 13th, which then kicks Christian's surplus property work session either to a separate work session, or we could move it to February 20th.
Could we add another work session? So
Or-
we can
That's what she's
start-
talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we could do
We're
that.
getting kind
Yeah, I
of
think we
logged
just need to
into.
add, because I think, Madam Chair, that I'm all for moving the county administrator's review up till as soon as we can start it, but to me, that's one, it's not gonna be a 1 hour or 2 hour, how do we proceed? From here, I think there could be some pretty lively discussions in that, so I'm sure it'll take more than work session or a longer work session, so, but the sooner we can start, I agree with you, the sooner we can start, the better off we are.
So that would be the
The
30th.
30th.
So if we can just plan for a work session on the administrator's position and just
On the
get
30th.
that one in on the 30th.
And then when would you like to do the surplus property, the foreclosure properties?
Is that the one we're talking about doing a separate?
A separate work session.
You're gonna be on, Stan, the second through the what?
I leave on I leave the morning of the third, well, I'll leave the afternoon of the second because we're spending the night in Portland. So I'll be gone the second, I'll be back in the office on Monday the 12th.
So the 2nd to the 12th, so 10 days, all right. So we need to figure out how we're gonna get this done before that. And I don't know that we can.
I don't,
Before the second?
Yes.
Yeah, we
It's
won't
not
be,
gonna happen.
really won't be ready.
no, I don't see how we can do that before that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so wow, okay, so that brings us up to.
I still think we need a separate one, but I look at probably the week after, I know to get caught up, the week of the
Well, the
17th.
12th, we have EOC all day.
That's a set, so I think like the 14th or something, like 15th. I'd probably be out on the 14th, but I don't know for sure.
I start at 7:30 that morning and I go till 8 that night, based on my current
Yeah.
calendar. So
Friday
Here, we
the,
can change that.
Friday the 16th?
I'm out that day.
She's out.
How about, yeah,
I mean, if that's the best date that works for everybody's calendar, we can probably have it then. And then the following Monday's a holiday.
15th on Thursday afternoon, after formal?
yeah, we
Yeah,
can
we
do
can
it.
do
I
that.
Thursday
don't have
the 15th?
anything until that night.
Thursday, yeah, the
you're not
Thursday the
gonna be there,
15th.
right? Till that night.
I've got the afternoon free that day and then that night.
We could say that tentatively and then we can check in at calendaring
Sure.
What
Okay,
time?
and we would do that after,
Tentatively the 15th. then.
After formal.
after fall.
after formal.
For how long?
Well, we take
How
a
long do
lunch
you
break
think it will
depending
take?
on what happens at formal.
2 hours?
These have always gone longer than I anticipated, so, you
We
know.
could either take a break or we could bring lunch in.
If we want to start right at 11, I would think a couple of hours, I'm hoping.
I'd say we start
Start
at
at
11.
At least to get,
play it by ear.
direction, and then
Yeah.
again, if we make some progress when we're out of time, then we can look at
Okay.
it different.
All right,
And hopefully the goal would be to get this sort of structured in such a way that it isn't something that we spend quite this much time on every time.
okay.
So,
Yeah, we'll weed out all those properties that we're just gonna get rid of.
Right.
And, yeah. And you've already done that, right, Michaela?
Mhm.
There you
You
go.
know
yeah,
all
the
of it, you
thing
know.
that needs to happen in the meantime is we're in the process of deeding the final properties over and then getting notices out to folks. So that's what we still need a little bit of time to do, but the 15th would be fine, from 11 to
Okay.
1.
All right. Okey-doke.
That works.
All right, thank you. Executive session, we have non-commissioner updates. Let's start with you, Commissioner Prison. What do you have for us?
So much.
All right.
God,
You want us to come back to you?
yeah.
Commissioner Olson?
Let me gather
What do you
my.
got?
Let me go back to Commissioner
Want me to
Brilson.
start?
Yeah, would you start?
Yeah, you start, because
Okay.
you got so much going
Oh,
on.
I got so much going on. Okay, a couple of things. I've gotten, some people have gotten in touch with me to say, hey, what's this personal property tax bill I'm getting
Good point.
notification?
Yeah.
So there are people who are business owners who have never gotten a personal property tax notification that they owe personal property taxes, and that's where you, and this has been something
Took
that's
me by surprise too.
been in effect in the state since 1844, but in our county, a lot of people have not received notification. So, contacted the assessor's office and I asked about that, and they said that, that basically, this is a new thing since 2015, where they're basically going door to door and saying to business owners, you've never filed before, you need to file, and so a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, I've never heard of this before. There is a program online where you can find out whether you owe and what you owe and how that works, but I'd really like to have the assessor and Samantha Williams, who is the author of that program that tells people how you pay property taxes on stuff you've owned forever, to come and give us a tutorial on that, because we're going to get questions and folks are noticeably upset about it.
I suggested to the assessor before he left for this conference that we need to do exactly that, have them come together and give us a presentation, because I know I've certainly got a couple phone calls and a couple emails that say, well, as a matter of fact, ran into somebody Sunday afternoon that I just hadn't seen that story. They had got one, and I'm not so sure why, if it's some different, they had got one from Wycombe. Something about an emergency fee for taxes on emergency property or something, and so they're gonna send me a copy. I don't know if this is totally something different, if it's somehow related, if every taxing district is sending something out.
So the county
know.
assessor's office sends
Yeah.
out a notice that says, if you own a business, and this is for farmers and for, and even, nonprofits are having to file an exemption.
Yeah.
But it's pretty complex, but there are people who've been in business for years and have never done
Never
it.
seen it.
So anyway, I think
Well, I
it's,
can remember when I got mine several years ago when I was in business, but you have to have a certain value and.
Yeah, there's exemptions.
Yeah,
Six
you-
thousand.
yeah, and so I filled out the form they sent with the notice, and I didn't know anything.
you still have to file.
Yeah, and
I would have expected that, so it would have been nice to know in advance that we were gonna get these.
But
So I
even
talked
if
to
you
the
are
assessor.
exempt,
You
you still have to file the form.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so it's pretty complicated, and I think we should just have somebody here to explain how that works. So she's going to come at some point and explain that. The other thing is, I reached out to the assessor's office again, and I asked, can you give us a heads up? The folks who are about to lose their properties during foreclosure, can we work with them to deal with the fact that folks are going to be losing their homes when they're delinquent on property taxes? So I contacted the Elise at the Housing Authority, and I asked her if we could take their foreclosure avoidance program and plug it into the data we have at the assessor's office that says, hey, these people are in trouble. Let's reach out to them and tell them what social services are available, what avoidance programs are available, and they've said yes.
Proactive, yeah.
A little more proactive, we don't need more homeless people, and we would love to be able to keep these folks in their homes. So there are some pretty heartbreaking stories. So anyway, so it's one of the things, I'd love to be able to see us be a little kinder and gentler when it comes to the foreclosure process. But that's a state thing, and I still think we should be able to do something at the county level. But thank you, Christian, for
Yeah, I mean, we talked about me looking into whether or not there were any other options, and I can talk more about it at the work session in February, but I've spoken with some others, and there just doesn't seem to be, outside of the statute we've already discussed. We have limited authority to sell back to the record owner or their contract purchaser, which I think could actually alleviate many of the situations where you have a home that's going through foreclosure with an occupant still in it who wants to stay. That should be a mechanism now, whether they can raise the funds to purchase the property back from the county for the back taxes owing. That's an open question, but that would hopefully go a long way towards avoiding anyone getting evicted from their home due to property tax foreclosure.
Yeah, if they do that within that first 4 years, they just need to bring 1 year.
Well, that's before we take judgment, correct?
Yeah, before you take judgment. So,
I'm talking
you
after the
know,
property
they
is
bring
built
that
up.
1 year and it puts it off, and so if they can get help, but by the time they're actually foreclosed, they're 6 years past.
Yeah, and what I'm talking about is even after that, there is a statutory authority that would allow us to sell it back to the record owner, correct, or their contract
Everything has to
purchaser,
be brought.
if they can prove the chain of title, and then the purchase has to be for not less than the outstanding amount of taxes, fees, and interest owed.
Yeah,
And,
which is.
yeah, I'm just thinking about the person who's mentally ill or elderly or in financial
Yeah.
distress, that's for them to leave with no money, no equity. We've got to find a way to be able to get some of that back to them.
Yeah, and that would have to be a
If they,
legislative
yeah,
fix.
if they
So
have
There
that's-
money
isn't anything I'm aware of that will allow us to deviate from what the distribution of proceeds statutes dictate we do. But as far as, I think the program with Housing Authority, making folks aware and doing what we can to keep them off of the foreclosure list to begin with is certainly worth exploring. And that would obviously be something to check with Derek further about.
Yeah, he said he'd be willing to put that information
Yeah.
in their
Good.
files and get that information out to them. So I think it's a start. We chip away at it as best we can. And
While you're looking, I do have something to report on.
okay, yes.
You sent an email to me also that we are aware of the noise situation at the foot Bishop. The jake braking that trucks are doing has created a real issue because they're making noises far in excess of Dundee's noise levels. I've been on the phone with Lisa, and she is working with ODOT, well, she works for ODOT, but she's working with her people at ODOT, and reaching out to the homeowners there, working with the city, so they are trying to find a solution. The first step is going to be a substantial amount of signage prior to the Fisha to truckers, and maybe an all-out enforcement for a few days to make sure that they understand we're serious. But there has to be a larger issue going forward because it is quite noisy. I just wanted to report back that is being worked on.
Good.
Yeah, I sat a couple places down, one off Nyberger Road and the other off towards 9th Street, as you just start down around the curve. I was surprised it is extremely loud.
Yeah.
And where that stretch of concrete is.
Yeah,
the
it's
groove,
just really,
I mean, that is significant. But on the flip side of that, there's a lot of smiles about the bypass, especially within the city of Newburgh and the city of Dundee. They've gotten their streets back, and I've gone both ways now, running back and forth to Newburgh, and it does
It's a
make a
difference.
significant difference in time. And time of day is not that big a deal. We still have really good flow. What we've done is we've added additional lanes, is basically.
and I have told our fellow commissioners in Marion County how much we so much appreciated them.
That having
Yes,
219
yeah,
taking them down to McKay.
Yeah, but they
And
do.
McKinley very much
Sam's
appreciated
real
it.
happy about that.
Yeah, a gentleman sent me a reading on a decibel meter that showed the decibel level in his backyard from the new traffic
Mr.
on the
Bell.
bypass. And he's not happy, and it's kind of like, I get it. I mean, that's a tough one to have to
It is
listen to.
loud.
So
It is
it's a
bad.
tough one. So, all right,
I
do you have anything else
I
for the
just
good
have
of
a
the
couple
order?
of things
Commissioner,
that I
yes.
brought up. This Thursday, I will be going over to AOC, Microsoft, Hilltop Communications, and NACO is going to be putting on a presentation along with AOC on using broadband white space for rural broadband initiative. And for those who don't know, very simply, white space is the area of the television broadcast spectrum that sits there and is not being used. And there's hardware and technology out there now that will allow broadband, high-speed broadband to run over that, running that white space spectrum. Of course, it probably at the national level doesn't have much of a chance because the National Associations of Broadcasters are totally against it because even though they haven't used a lot of their white space in 15, 20 years, they don't want to give up any of that additional broadcast space in the spectrum they could use. But that's going to be Thursday at 1 o'clock over at AOC, and then the other thing is will be the Yamhill County, it looks like I'm going to go to the Yamhill County this up in our calendar, maybe I did the Small Woodlands meeting at the Public Works Building at 6:30 on the 25th. And that's all I have.
All right, well, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we will conclude today's informal session, January 23rd, it's 3:29.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
You gotta go what?
I gotta go to White Cap.
White capping, huh? Oh, your cap, my cap, white cap.
Okay.
Kroger.
Yes, ma'am.
Kroger is Fred Meyer. Kroger, Fred Meyer.
Fred Myers.
I
I think it's Fred Myers.
I think it's. Let's go. Committee manager.
Thank you.
Very good. Chris Roman.
Okay. That,